Greetings, folks. This is Ron Wise Gamgee, and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. I recently came across a video on my YouTube feed titled "How the TTRPG community became a paragon in all caps of diversity in parentheses against all odds" from the channel J Martin Player Role. So watch that video before watching this one. The link will be in the description, and come back when you're done. You're done? Welcome back. Onward with the critique. So at 1 minute and 30 seconds, he says, back then you wouldn't expect a bunch of nerdy white males sitting, wasting away their lives, trying to kill an imaginary dragon, rolling dice. To which I respond, what are TTRPG gamers doing nowadays that's any different? At 1 minute 38 seconds, he says something along to the effect of, today, however, it's much different. A typical game of D&D today is a bunch of diverse people creating a fascinating story and having an awesome time. And to that, I respond, that's no different than how it was back then. Your reduction of calling the diverse people who played D&D down to nerdy white males is racist and sexist. That's even worse than people shitting on them for being nerds, because they didn't go after their race or gender. At 1 minute 50 seconds, he says, why did that happen? How did it occur? And is that a good thing? To which my response is, that happened because nerds were pariahs back in the mid to late 20th century, targeted by cool Chads and Stacys, as well as by Christian fundamentalists. This ironically brought a hell of a lot of attention to D&D and the TTRPG hobby through the Satanic Panic. From that emerged the monster games from White Wolf Publishing, such as Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, and so on, which brought in the Goths. Not expecting to come across the TTRPG hobby, but sticking around because they found games where they can channel their gothiness into an imaginary world and even overlap with the real world through LARP, live action roleplay. Even then, D&D still wasn't considered cool until more and more cool people, or cool looking people, have outed themselves as D&D players. And then things really exploded with the advent of World of Warcraft. It was there when being a nerd was considered mainstream, and D&D got the benefits of WoW's crumbs bestowed upon them. At least, that's my working theory. So in 3 minutes and 11 seconds, he says that that D&D back then wasn't cool and it wasn't a good thing. Why wasn't playing D&D back in the 20th century, why wasn't it a good thing? You know, like, you're just saying stuff. And then at 3 minutes 15 seconds, he talks about how D&D is not like an exciting thing, and to this I reply, on what merit does he make this statement that saying D&D is not an exciting thing when the way that it's played is fundamentally the same now as it was back then? People gathering together, playing other characters in an imaginary world, and going on adventures. Then at 3 minutes 18 seconds, he says something along the lines that it brought a lot of stereotypes with it. Now, D&D is and has always been a nerdy thing to do, but the way nerds were treated back then was much worse than the way that they are treated now, in large part. Then in 3 minutes 50 seconds, he mentions how Critical Role and Dimension 20's role in popularizing D&D, not just because they were highly entertaining to watch, but because they were diverse. And honestly, I can't say. What I can say is this. If you got into D&D now, and not back then, because someone of your demographic wasn't represented, you're a bigot, and you never cared about D&D in the first place. At 4 minutes and 15 seconds, he goes on, he just keeps on repeating the word diversity, diversity, multiple times within seconds and just throughout the video. And since I respond, that he should be more honest and say people of color and LGBTQ plus people and women instead of reducing them down to diversity, because when you do that, that's insulting to each and every individual, because that kind of rhetoric obfuscates their individuality as they're being put into boxes of white, male, female, people of color, and LGBTQ plus. In 4 minutes and 31 seconds, he says that those shows treated it, as in diversity, as something to be obligatory rather than something that to be pandering. To which I respond that when you make having people of color in your gaming group as something that's obligatory, that is pandering. And this is something that I say like as a progressive myself. Like saying this kind of shit. It's fucking woke skull racism. And further along at 4 minutes and 59 seconds, when he talks about the obligatory LGBTQ representation in D&D, to this I respond, no one has stopped the LGBTQ community into putting in LGBTQ plus content in their D&D campaign settings. WotC doing this is a marketing strategy, not them being progressive. If it was more profitable to be fascistic, you bet your ass that WotC would make their D&D books more fascistic in tone, but it's not, and so they don't. At 5 minutes and 10 seconds, when he goes on about like the popularity of tieflings, the points that he makes here can be said of half-elves, which were a playable race long before tieflings ever were. Oh yeah, and half-elves are no longer going to be a thing in the next version of D&D 5th edition because of reasons. At 5 minutes and 38 seconds, he goes on about the vast options of character customization and being a hero no matter what you are. And to this I reply that this has always existed since the inception of the hobby. You don't need a gaming company to sell it to you, and if you do, then you're a metaphorical pig at the trough with an atrophied imagination. Also, LGBTQ plus people have always existed in the hobby since the inception of the hobby. When you suggest otherwise, or when he suggests otherwise, he exposes himself as either an ignoramus or a liar. At 6 minutes and 15 seconds, Jay says that he tries to make sure to include that having diversity and including them in those groups is important. And to me, that sounds tokenistic and incredibly patronizing to people of color and LGBTQ plus people. I mean, imagine, just being mask off about it and saying, your person of coloredness or your womanness or your non-heteronormativity is of higher value to me and the hobby than your interest in the hobby. This is how his rhetoric sounds. The TTRPG hobby has always been a space for everyone. By suggesting that this was not always the case, he displays his ignorance or his attempts to lie to his audience. At 7 minutes and 43 seconds, I quote him, saying, "But it's also true that there are a lot of people from that generation, OG D&D players, who generally just, have a hateful image towards the new people coming into D&D. They're upset not at who they are specifically, but what they represent and what they bring, and I just want to discuss that real quick." So, what specifically do these old school D&D players supposedly hate towards the new people coming to D&D? And by new people, to me, and I'm assuming that to the average person, it just sounds like new players. Is that what Jay Martin is referring to as new people, or is that simply a phrase for people of color, women, and LGBTQ plus people, as if they've never played D&D beforehand? You know, I wish he was explicit and that he would stop leading his audience with insinuations of, you know, these of the old school crowd being racist, misogynist, homophobic, or bigoted against non-binary folks. Now, are there individuals, you know, that happen to play tabletop role-playing games and are those things? Yes, but that exists everywhere. In 8 minutes and 48 seconds, you know, he stands on a soapbox, you know, proclaiming tabletop RPGs are a space for everybody. You know, by speaking to old school D&D gamers in this manner, he comes off like a sanctimonious hypocrite. At 9 minutes and 17 seconds, you know, he goes on to say, but if you're thinking critically, then you should also be considering that everyone is human and everyone deserves this space and we should all be able to have fun. To which I respond, that was always the case. Holy shit, his smugness is off the charts. At 9 minutes and 48 seconds, you know, he says something along the lines of that the intention is for all of us to be different with regards to like how people play their characters. And again, this is always the case, and presenting it as such, as otherwise that is incredibly ignorant and or dishonest. To Jay Martin, if this is all about chasing that dollar, you do you, man, but be honest about it. If, however, you were truly ignorant of what I presented here, consider yourself enlightened. If you like or dislike anything you've seen in this video, please give it a like or a dislike and leave a comment. Subscribe if you want to support my channel, and if you really want to support my endeavors, head over to my Patreon and become an appreciated trooper. The link is in the description. Until then, folks, take care and play to find out what happens.